Okay, well, welcome to the Republican House Caucus room. We're in the middle of a debate where, for the second time in the last week or so, there's a major attempt to, double down on Obamacare. We don't think that's very smart. We're out there debating hard against it. We've had a couple of really long days of floor action where, from our perspective, we've been pushing back against some bills that are really addressing the wrong problems, not the things that put people to work, but really are election messaging issues for the other side. And we're going to go to questions, or do you want to say something?
Just a few thoughts. We've got a lot of things we can talk about, priority bills that made it out and things. Kind of a summary of yesterday from the action in the Senate. Went through and I totaled up, only one member didn't get a bill out of the Senate. That was Rodney Tong. We made sure that we worked with the other side, that their members had a chance to pass legislation too. We didn't shut anybody out over in the Senate. They all got bills. The only one that didn't insist on having a bill was Rodney. So it was spread around. The percentage of bills passed, the minority side of the aisle passed just slightly more than what we passed as a minority in the 2012 session. We wanted to make sure we were treating them at least as well as we were treated, if not better. The fact that nobody was shut out, that's the way we wanted to work. I think if you saw the Senate yesterday, it was pretty calm for cutoff day. There was no floor fights, there's no filibusters. We kept working and working differently than the other Washington works. So that's first thing I wanted to come out with.
What's your reaction to today's revenue forecast, specifically the part concerning the potential revenue from marijuana?
Okay, I heard about the marijuana totals. Do you have the overall number? Because I haven't had a chance to.
Over a 4-year period, it'd be nearly $190 million, so through 2019.
Yeah. And the total revenue forecast was?
Total was $30 million additional to work with this 2-year budget, and then an additional $82 million for the next 2-year budget, half of which, or more than half of which, would come from marijuana.
Okay, that's a similar upward number I think that we were estimating. I would defer to Senator Braun on some of that, but we're very cautious about budgeting any of the marijuana money because it's been my personal experience with people that come through my office. There's 8 different ways to spend every dollar, and until that dollar actually shows up, we need to be cautious. And so I'm of the mindset that you exercise caution.
Oh, yeah, as you said, it was up 30 million for this biennium, 82 for next biennium. 51 of that is for marijuana. We're still taking we'd still characterize that as flat. I mean, those are big numbers, but in the context of the overall budget, that's flat. So we're going to be very careful and disciplined on any new spending. Make sure we come out with a budget that's is very cautious in spending any new money, especially the marijuana money.
Well, I think it's also really important to remember that the initiative was extremely explicit about where those dollars go. They're highly earmarked in places where it's not that easy for the legislature to get at. And so the initiative was pretty careful with that.
I might add, though, Rachel, that we'll be getting the numbers from Colorado the 22nd or the 25th, so we'll have some idea, because our systems will be so similar, that we'll have some idea of what we might expect. And to point out also that there was a chunk of the initiative money that is up for grabs now because the decision that we made to get rid of the basic health plan. So the monies that were set aside for that are sort of the dollars in question right now.
And speaking of Colorado, I know their numbers aren't released yet, but today, I'm not sure if you saw their governor there, basically put out a budget proposal that is allocating a good amount of money based on the revenue from marijuana, and so it adds up to what it looks like it could be near $1 billion. So do you think we're lowballing the potential revenue that could be coming from that market?
It's my hope that we are. My colleagues in Colorado who I've been visiting with on this issue are very optimistic.
Here's my big question of the day. It has nothing to do with the revenue forecast. I'm wondering what on earth happened with that teacher bill yesterday? What are the consequences going to be? And how can you fix this?
Well, I think having the education chair here is probably well-timed.
So we were very surprised that the Democrats decided not to go with that bill. I'd been working with Senator McAuliffe and Senator Rolfes since the middle of last week. We actually skinnied down the bill, used Senator McAuliffe's language that came out of the committee. I expected Senator McAuliffe, Senator Rolfes, Frocht, Hardgrove, Hatfield, Hobbs, Mullet, which we knew. There's about 780 that typically with us, this was a very straightforward bill. It had absolutely nothing to do with federal control, despite what Senator McAuliffe was talking about. It had absolutely nothing to do with the actual TPEP bill, which is what Senator Rolfes was moving around, right? We knew that the WEA was basically locking down that caucus, right? And so we thought I was literally working an amendment with Senator Rolfes up until when we ran it on Tuesday. I'd given them the language last Thursday. On Friday, they asked for the weekend to work their caucus. Monday morning, they came back to me and said, well, we have Patty Murray coming in this afternoon. We're going to need to at least to this afternoon or this evening. That evening, they said, well, can we do it again tomorrow? So I'd expected to have at least 7 or 8 votes on their side. Our issue is we knew that this guarantees the $40 million and that the extension of the waiver. This is not an NTIB bill, so this was our last shot in the Senate to do it. Hopefully, the House may be able to find they have a little more flexibility in how they determine NTIB issues, but hopefully they can find something out, but they couldn't get a bill out of committee. So that's what we're hoping to see.
What happened to Senator Erickson's oil transportation bill? Seemed like he was, at noon, he seemed like he was ready to have it go to the floor and never made it to the floor.
I was a little focused on the Sentinel list.
Well, I think I think there's still vehicles that are potentially out there. The oil thing oil transport shouldn't be the November election. It should be thoughtful public policy. And there's vehicles out there that could emerge that we could have some good discussions about something other than who gets kudos in the next election.
Okay, so vehicles out there, are you talking in the next 3 weeks, or are you talking
Yes.
next?
Yes, I think there's vehicles out there that have been passed. There's ways to find common sense solutions to these problems.
Senator Slaughter, Senator, listen, if we go back to me,
Sure.
Eric, his question about, you explained what happened, Senator,
Right.
that's out from your view. What does it mean for the caucus and for the chamber? I mean, that is a significant defeat for a majority in any year to put a bill out and to come up with only, 19 votes. So what do you do in your caucus on this issue? And
The caucus, there was no surprises in our caucus where people were voting.
so why did you run the bill not have?
Because my assumption in working with Senator Rolfes and Senator McAuliffe is that we'd pick up 6 to 7 votes on the Democratic side. They were very cagey. They would not commit one way or the other, and so we're looking at hundreds of thousands of the most at-risk children in the state getting, $40 million from the feds. Ever since the Democrats have been in the minority, all they've been doing is standing up and yelling, we need more money, right? They're right now sitting there saying, well, we need more money unless we have to actually hold people accountable for it, and we don't like that, so we're not going to take this $40 million, right? So this is not, our caucus was fine. There was no surprises on our caucus side. And, as you know, and education's one of those crazy issues. It goes by district, and those guys voted the districts. They were all very upfront with me, right? There was a couple guys that were on the fence that if we needed them, they would be there, but we all saw that going down fast, right? So we ran the bill assuming we would have 6 to 7 votes on the D side.
I can honestly say, Jerry, that one of our members was on the phone during the vote count trying to talk to that member's school superintendent about, hey, this is the repercussions of not doing this, that they were They were communicating and actively considering it. I don't think, it was with great pride that we didn't lose a single bill last year, but this was cutoff, and we put the issue out there.
Yeah, I've heard that this is going to disproportionately affect the school districts that have a large number of minority students.
Oh, Seattle, it's $2.4 million in Seattle.
Let's look at Pasco. Pasco is shared by Senator Hewitt and I. Fast-growing, large minority community. Minority is the majority in the Pasco School District. They're going to lose just about $900,000. That's real money in Pasco.
It's 1.5 million in Senator McCall's district. I mean, this is real money.
Do you take what would be an unusual step maybe for you guys and approach Speaker Chop directly, leadership to leadership, to try to push it through, or go to the governor and try to make the argument?
I hope they are looking at the facts in the coming 3 weeks, that this is a very real situation, and that they examine the facts and make the right decisions.
I mean,
Well, we heard speeches all this week on the House floor about numbers that are smaller than this in terms of demands for funding from the other side. And this never, I don't even think it got a hearing in the House Education Committee. So the pressure ought to be on over here.
What do you think of the approach that some of the Democrats seem to be going with, of having the governor and the members of Congress directly petition the U.S. Department of Ed? Do you think that that's a pathway that might work?
I think it's very different. If we're going, we have to solve our own problems, and depending on the other Washington to solve our problems is very risky.
OSPI and Alan Burke, they talked directly to the Department of Education, and they said, look, we've already denied 7 states for not fixing their evaluation system. They could not imagine a situation, despite Senator Murray and Senator Cantwell, and the rest of our delegation, very influential, they're very smart, capable people. I don't get a strong sense that the Department of Education is actually going to listen to say, oh no, look, we really mean it this way, just give us a little more time. They did not give any indication that that was a likely scenario.
Was there a Transco meeting this morning, and what is the result of that, those talks?
The good news is nothing was happening, so we put out a plan in a press release a week ago, put it out there that we're trying another approach. There was meetings this morning, and I think Senator King was encouraged that people were willing to sit down and talk again. We're not the caucus of no. We really want to work the issue, and so we tried to jumpstart the conversation again.
Senator Fain was there this morning.
Yeah, I guess the only one I'm good at.
Yeah, the transportation meeting, were there any conclusions that came out of that, or any progress towards something?
The expectations going in were always kind of up in the air. I would characterize the meeting as being productive and exceeding kind of expectations. The House and the governor's offices were not represented there, which is unfortunate, but the Senate Democrats had 5 of their members there, and we had actually a very frank conversation about where the sticking points between the respective proposals are, and there was, I think, a pretty good agreement that we would get back together again on Friday and continue that.
Are they still insisting that you guys need to vote something out too? I mean, was there talk about that? About
This morning's conversation was not as much about process as it was about the actual issues that we're facing, and so it was one of those good opportunities to actually look at each other in the eye and say, what is your concern about issue A, and how can we address issue B? And so those are the kind of productive dialogues that you'd like to see happen if you're going to move towards making progress in a transportation package. So again, I characterize it as being very positive, and I would like to see further involvement from House leaders and the governor, but that does not mean that we won't move forward and continue our talks with Senate leaders.
Who is the Senate? So who all was there? It was
we had representation from the House Republican Caucus with Representative Hargrove and Representative Orcutt, and then representing the Senate Majority Coalition Caucus with myself, Senator King, and Senator Tom. And then the Senate Democratic Caucus was very well represented by Senator Leas, Senator Hobbs, Senator Ide, Senator Nelson, and Senator Frocht.
Big room.
Based on that meeting, what would you say are the top issues that you've got to address?
I think the issues are, there are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. For the issues that were discussed in the meeting, and I don't want to be talking endlessly about where negotiations are, but I think they're fair to say because it was something that we've talked a lot about. It's the level of multimodal funding, and there was a recognition that there was a significant increase in our latest proposal on for the Majority Coalition Caucus on putting funding into transit particularly. Issues surrounding the legacy stormwater and the ELSA funds and MODCA funds, and then our continued conversation over reforms. Because remember, haggling over the ins and outs of a package is one thing. The majority coalition and the House Republicans have been very clear from the beginning that it would be irresponsible for us to put forward a package and to increase taxes and provide more funding to the Washington State Department of Transportation without significant reforms. And so those conversations over reforms will be ongoing and will, I imagine, take a lot of our conversation on Friday.
Sales tax too?
And sales tax is also part of that conversation.
Did Senator Ide express a willingness to allow hearings on any of those reform bills?
Yeah, I just talked to Senator Ide about that.
Supplemental budget, when's it gonna come out on your side, or is it gonna come out, or are you gonna present?
I think Senator Braun's been working hard, and he should help you out with that, John.
So, yeah, we're close. We continue to work hard on that. As you know, the first time in 6 years, we haven't had a deficit going into a supplemental year, so that's a good starting point, but we also have some challenges with the four-year balance, and we've been working. I think we're on track to roll that out in the not too distant future. And we have, we were waiting for the revenue forecast, of course. Now we know what it is. We talked about that earlier. It's relatively flat, a little bit of positive, but not enough to change the broad plan, which is good, solid discipline on spending and a plan that balances and keeps our priorities where they have been.
Tip the scale to make you decide to do one, because for weeks we've been hearing that you didn't need to do
So
something.
I want to be clear. I'm not saying I'm saying we're preparing one so that we have options. I would submit that we don't. There is a scenario where we don't need to do a budget, and where we may be willing to do that. But it's only responsible to make sure you have options, right?
Come out, announce your plan this week, next week, trying to pin you down.
Okay, so I'm not gonna be pinned down on an exact day. I'd say we expect to be briefing the caucus on what our recommendations are by sometime next week, and we'll see what the caucus has to say, and then we'll roll it out from there.
Well, let's see, back on the teacher thing.
Yes.
I was just noticing something kind of interesting, and that's that there were 7 Republicans who voted no.
Yes.
And I noticed they were all people that voted against the Real Hope Act when it came to the floor. I was wondering if there's some sort of a connection, or what was the reason why?
You'll have to ask them on that. What they were telling me was their districts, their superintendents, parents, they had gotten calls. This had been an issue for the last week and a half, and they were basically saying they didn't want to do it, and that they didn't think it was necessary to do. And, and we have a very big tent in the Majority Coalition Caucus. And so, you got to be able to, they've got to sit there and represent their districts. But they were very upfront. It was not a surprise.
Sure. And also, not to be clear, does the state actually lose this money, or is it simply the federal government reallocates it and spends it elsewhere?
Right, the federal government, so right now you get Title I money, right, and they can use it a wide variety of ways, very flexible money for the most at-risk students, and it's everything from pre-K, all-day K, paraeducation, the type of thing. What happens is, without the waiver, every school in the state will be declared failing by the No Child Left Behind law, right? So once it's declared failing, the superintendent needs to then send a letter to every parent saying you are in a failing school, and we can either bus you, provide transportation to a school that's not failing, which there is no option, or we provide tutoring by your choice. And so what happens is this $40 million, which is being used within the schools in various ways, gets taken out and set aside over here so that the parents can choose tutoring for their children.
And why is this bad?
Why is that bad? Because you have no accountability. It's outside guys. You have no accountability for it. You have, it's all over the map. We have no determination. Is it a good tutor, a bad tutor? Does it work? Does it not work? Right?
Well, and I would submit as well that school districts need that flexibility, Eric, to be able to spend the money in the best possible way. So if now they are having to put it in a pot for these other things, then we've just removed a tremendous amount of flexibility.
Well, and they're going to be closing, I mean, Tacoma came out and said they're going to have to close 3 or 4 preschools because of it, right? They're losing, significant amount of cash for the most at-risk students. Right? We've had a growing opportunity, we're one of the handful of states that has a growing opportunity gap. It continues to absolutely astonish me that this is such a simple issue with federal money, right? I was in the room with Senator McAuliffe, Governor Gregoire, Dan Meyer, Representative Linton, when we actually cut this deal. We all knew that student acceptance scores will be part of it in some form or fashion. The deal at that time was the CAN language, right? The federal government came back and said, no, it's a must. Last OSPI came out and said it's probably going to impact about 16% of teachers, right? Because there are some classes that don't have state tests wide. So this wasn't as if we sat there and said, oh, we're going to make this big change and we want to do this. It's literally a Democrat administration coming in saying, we told you we were going to do this a year ago, we're now doing it, right? So it continues to be astonishing.
Going back to the vote on the teacher eval bill, I did
Yes.
catch up with a few people that you said you thought you had on the Democratic
Right.
side, and they said they never were voting for the bill. Since we can't get in your caucus rooms, it's really hard for us to figure this stuff out. But
Right.
I guess there's a sentiment of you guys can't get your own caucus to vote for it, so why are you banking on Democrats and that there's a...
Because it's the right thing to do, right? At the end of the day, again, we have a very broad tent. Everyone's got to be voting their districts. We're not always going to have this, but education reform, if you look at the 24 credit bill, right, again, came out right down the middle, right? 30 votes, 10, it's the same issue. Education's always been like this.
We've had, one of the things in the Senate, it's not a dictatorship. And you look at some of the things like the 937 bills, some of the workers' comp bills, they've been bipartisan efforts. Most of the real juice in the Senate is pretty serious bipartisan work because we're not a dictatorship. So you expected some level of cooperation like we've seen on things like last bill of the night last night, 937. We had, I think, 4 minority Democrats voted with us on that particular bill. So we've seen lots of cooperation in other areas, but this one was very different.
What would you say to accusations that it was more like a political stunt than an actual attempt to get the bill through?
I don't think $40 million is a political stunt. $40 million for disadvantaged kids. Take it to Pasco. Take it to Tacoma. This is about disadvantaged kids and a very real problem. That's not a political stunt.
Senator McAuliffe introduced the bill, right? She sponsored the bill. We used her language, right? So, political stunt would be, we're going to put this up in such a way that doesn't make any sense. This was not a political issue, right? But they made it one. They decided this was the time that they were, at the expense of the most vulnerable kids, they're going to show unity in the caucus, right? It's not like we were asking them for the majority votes.
I think the most disturbing thing to me about that vote, after it occurred, when the members were on the floor of the Democrat caucus, high-fiving each other, I felt sick to my stomach because as a former classroom teacher, letting that money go, and it's about $3.1 million for my district. Letting that money go was just a smack in the face to those kids who, without it, are going to be hurt. And to those school districts who need that flexibility to pay for those teachers who are specializing in helping those kids. I was stunned. High-fiving. What in that was to be proud of? How could anyone celebrate that?
The Voting Rights Act bill that passed the House, I see it has a hearing this week. I can't remember before which committee in the Senate. Is that a measure that has any chance of gaining traction in the Senate, do you think?
Well, I have to see how the hearing goes. Our chairmen have been pretty consistent in hearing bills that came out of the House, more so than their counterparts across the rotunda.
So do you have a personal opinion on that measure at this point?
No, we haven't had a hearing on it yet, so to comment on something that hasn't even had a hearing is premature.
Been before the body, it's been within the legislature in past years, it's not.
Well, you know, a lot of things have been in front of the legislature for past years. This is,
On my end on it.
No, but thank you.
Thanks for that transition, Sue.
The governor is going to issue an executive order today or tomorrow, creating a task force to look at outdoor recreation and also long-term funding for state parks. I know some members of the Senate caucus have been concerned he's going to manage by executive order, and these are issues you guys have looked at in the past.
I'd rather have a task force than an executive order creating low-carbon fuel standards or abolishing the death penalty. And I think I've had members that would like to serve on that because I think our members care deeply about state parks. So, yeah, I knew it was coming, or coming, likely to come, and I would rather work cooperatively to have our state parks open in the future than by executive order or not funding parks and closing them.
You know, there's been quite a bit of bipartisan effort, especially on parks in the House when, you know, it's not always that bipartisan. So that's a good area for us to work on together, where I think a lot of us would like to see is public lands really being used by the public instead of taken out of circulation. And so if this is a forum where we can pursue that, we're anxious to engage.